A 68-year-old woman, betrayed and left with nothing, takes a chance on a cursed gas station in the middle of the desert, believing it's just a place to start over. But when she begins to uncover what's hidden beneath that cursed gas station, she realizes it's not just an abandoned building. It's a secret powerful enough to change her fate forever. Subscribe for more powerful stories and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. At 68, Evelyn Carter had once lived a life that looked whole from the outside, years of devotion to her family, a modest home filled with memories, and a quiet belief that loyalty would always be returned. But now, she found herself alone in a cramped rental on the edge of the Nevada desert, where the wind howled through cracked windows like a constant reminder of everything she had lost. After a bitter legal battle over property, the very people she had sacrificed her youth for her own children had turned against her. They didn't just take the house, they erased her place in their lives. No calls, no explanations, just silence that felt heavier than any argument. Each morning, Evelyn woke to the dull hum of an aging ceiling fan, staring at the peeling paint above her, wondering how decades of love could vanish so quickly. The loneliness was suffocating, pressing in from every corner of that tiny room. And yet, beneath the exhaustion in her eyes, something still flickered, a quiet, stubborn resilience, because deep down, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. This wasn't how her story was going to end. The turning point in Evelyn Carter's life didn't arrive with a dramatic announcement or a helping hand. It came quietly on a scorching afternoon when the desert sun burned so intensely it felt like the world itself was trying to erase everything in its path. Evelyn sat alone at a small wooden desk in her rented room, a stack of unpaid bills spread out before her like a map of dead ends. The numbers didn't lie. After rent, food, and the bare minimum to survive, she had just under $9,200 left to her name. That was it. No safety net, no family to fall back on, no second chances at least, not the kind most people would recognize. Her eyes drifted to an old laptop in the corner, its screen flickering as if it, too, was on its last breath. With nothing else to do, she opened a local auction site, one of those obscure listings filled with foreclosed properties, abandoned structures, and places no one else wanted. At first, it was just a way to pass the time, until she saw it. Desert Fuel Stop closed since 1983, sold as is. Buyer assumes all risks. There was only one blurry photo, a crumbling gas station sitting alone in the middle of nowhere. The paint was peeling, the signage barely readable. The pumps looked like rusted skeletons from another era. But what caught her attention wasn't the condition. It was the price. $8,000. Evelyn leaned closer to the screen, her heartbeat slowing into something sharper, more focused. She clicked into the listing, scanning every word with the precision of someone who had learned the hard way that details mattered. That's when she saw the warning. Property rumored locally to be cursed. Multiple previous owners abandoned site. Several unexplained incidents reported. Purchase discouraged. Most people would have closed the tab immediately. Evelyn didn't. Instead, she felt something shift inside her, a strange, almost electric clarity. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, she wasn't thinking about what she could lose. She was thinking about what she no longer had to fear losing. They already took everything, she whispered to herself, her voice steady in a way it hadn't been in a long time. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, the peeling walls, the stale air, the silence that followed her everywhere, it all pressed in like a cage she hadn't realized she was still locked inside. And suddenly, that abandoned gas station in the middle of the desert didn't look like a risk. It looked like an escape. She scrolled further, reading through old comments left by previous bidders. Words like dangerous, haunted, don't go near it after dark repeated over and over again. One comment stood out. My uncle tried to fix that place up back in the 90s, left after 3 weeks. Wouldn't say why. Just said the ground didn't feel right. Evelyn stared at that sentence for a long moment. Then she did something no one, not even her past self, would have expected. She smiled. Because fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. That night, She packed what little she had, 2 suitcases, a box of old photographs she couldn't bring herself to throw away, and a small metal lockbox containing the last of her savings. The next morning, she drove 3 hours into the Nevada desert in a car that rattled with every mile, the horizon stretching endlessly ahead of her like a question waiting to be answered. When she finally saw it, the gas station looked even worse in person. It stood alone against the vast emptiness, surrounded by nothing but dry earth and silence. The wind howled through broken windows, carrying with it a low, hollow sound that felt almost intentional. Evelyn stepped out of the car slowly, the heat wrapping around her like a warning. For a moment, she hesitated, not because she was afraid, but because she understood something now that she hadn't before. This wasn't just a purchase. It was a line, a point of no return. Behind her was a life that had rejected her. In front of her was something unknown, uncertain, possibly dangerous. But it was hers. She reached into her bag, pulled out the folded purchase agreement, and looked at her own signature at the bottom of the page. Evelyn Carter! For the first time in years, that name didn't feel like it belonged to someone who had been left behind. It felt like the beginning of someone new. The wind picked up again, louder this time, rattling the loose metal sign above the station. It creaked violently, swinging back and forth as if trying to warn her to turn around. Evelyn didn't move. Instead, she took a slow step forward, then another, and as her hand reached for the rusted door handle, she felt it that same quiet, unshakable certainty rising inside her chest. Whatever this place was hiding, whatever stories had driven others away, she was no longer the kind of woman who ran from broken things. She was the kind of woman who walked straight into them and uncovered the truth buried beneath. The first night at the abandoned gas station didn't begin with fear. It began with silence, a deep, suffocating silence that felt unnatural, like the desert itself was holding its breath. Evelyn Carter sat on the dusty floor of the station's small back office, a single lantern casting long, trembling shadows across cracked walls. The air smelled of rust, old fuel, and something else, something colder, something buried. She had done what she could before nightfall cleared a small space, locked the front door as best as the broken frame allowed, and set her 2 suitcases against the wall. It wasn't home, but it was hers. Outside, the wind whispered across the poosed sand, brushing against the building with a low, dragging sound. Inside, the silence pressed in again. Evelyn leaned back against the wall, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to rest. Every creak, every shift in the structure made her eyes flicker open again. Then it happened. A sound. Soft at first, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. Clink. Evelyn froze. Her breath caught halfway in her chest as her eyes slowly moved toward the center of the room. Nothing, just shadows. She waited, listened. 5 seconds. 10. Then, clink, clink. This time it was clearer. Metal, something hitting metal. From below, Evelyn sat up slowly, her heart beginning to pound not wildly, but steadily, like a warning drum. That's not possible, she whispered. The floor beneath her was solid concrete. She had walked it earlier, felt the cracks, the uneven patches, but it was still ground. Still stable. Still quiet. Until now. Then came the second sound. A low, dragging shuffle. Not above, not outside. Beneath her. Evelyn's spine stiffened as the sound stretched into something unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow, uneven, like someone walking across a surface that shouldn't exist. Her eyes locked onto the floor. Every instinct told her to stand up, to leave, to get back in the car and drive until the desert disappeared behind her. But she didn't move, because something deeper than fear had taken hold. Curiosity? No. Recognition? The same instinct that had made her click on that listing. The same quiet voice that told her this place wasn't what it seemed. The lantern flickered. And then, bang! A sharp odor from directly beneath the floor. Evelyn gasped, scrambling to her feet as the sound echoed through the building. Dust fell from the ceiling in a soft doge, catching the lantern light like falling ash. Silence again. But it was different now. Charged. Alive. Evelyn's breathing slowed as she forced herself to think. Not panic. Think. She grabbed the lantern and moved cautiously toward the center of the room, each step deliberate, controlled. The light revealed something she hadn't noticed before. A faint outline. Rectangular, barely visible beneath years of dirt and wear. Her pulse quickened. No, she murmured. She crouched down, brushing her hand across the surface. Dust lifted into the air, revealing a thin seam running along the concrete. This wasn't just a floor, it was a cover. The realization hit her like a sudden drop. The sounds, the metal, the footsteps, they weren't coming through the ground. They were coming from a space beneath it. Evelyn's fingers trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what she was beginning to understand. This place wasn't cursed. It was hiding something. Then, as if to confirm it, clink. Closer now. Right below her hand, Evelyn jerked back slightly, her breath catching. Whoever or whatever was down there, it was real. The wind outside howled louder, slamming something loose against the side of the building. The lantern flickered violently, shadows dancing across the walls like silent witnesses. Evelyn stood there, staring at the outline in the floor. Every logical thought told her to leave. Call someone? Wait until morning. But logic had never given her anything except a life she lost. This was different. This was unknown. And for the first time in decades, it felt like power. She straightened slowly, gripping the lantern tighter as her fear transformed into something sharper, something focused. Because if there was one thing Evelyn Carter had learned after losing everything, it was this: the truth doesn't come to those who wait. It reveals itself to those willing to dig. Another sound echoed from below. This time, unmistakable. A slow, deliberate step. Right beneath her feet, Evelyn's eyes hardened. All right, she whispered, her voice no longer trembling. Let's see what you're hiding. And in that moment, the abandoned gas station was no longer a shelter. It had become a doorway. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Not because she couldn't, but because something inside her had shifted, and once it did, there was no going back. She sat in the center of the dusty room, the lantern beside her casting a steady glow over the cracked concrete floor. Her eyes never left the faint rectangular outline beneath her feet. Hours passed, but the fear that should have driven her away never came. Instead, it was replaced by something far more dangerous. Clarity! By sunrise, the desert light crept through the broken windows, painting the room in pale gold. The silence had returned. No footsteps, no metal sounds, nothing. As if the night before had never happened. Evelyn slowly stood, her joints stiff, her body aching but her mind sharper than it had been in years. People don't abandon land like this for no reason, she murmured. She walked toward the old counter, brushing her fingers across a thick layer of dust. Everything about this place told a story, but not the one people were repeating. Cursed. She let the words sit in her mouth for a moment, then shook her head. No, she said firmly, that's too convenient. Because Evelyn had spent her entire life watching how people used fear. Fear to control. Fear to hide. Fear to keep others from asking the right questions. And suddenly, the stories surrounding this gas station didn't feel like warnings anymore. They felt like distractions. She stepped outside, the dry desert air hitting her face like a wake-up call. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, empty, quiet, isolated, perfect. Too perfect. If you wanted to hide something, she said softly, scanning the horizon, this is exactly where you'd do it. Her eyes narrowed as she looked back at the station. The broken windows, the rusted pumps, the collapsing roof. It all looked like decay, but now she saw something else. A cover. Evelyn walked slowly around the building, her steps deliberate, her mind working through patterns the way it used to before life reduced her to survival mode. She noticed things she had missed the day before. The ground near the back of the building was slightly uneven. Not naturally. but disturbed, as if something beneath it had shifted over time. She crouched down, running her fingers across the dry dirt. Beneath the top layer, the soil felt different, compacted, reinforced. Her heart began to beat faster, but not from fear. From confirmation. This place wasn't abandoned, she whispered. It was sealed. The realization sent a chill through her, not the kind that makes you run, but the kind that pulls you deeper. Because now, everything made sense. The rumors, the disappearances, the silence. It wasn't a curse that drove people away. It was something they weren't meant to find. Evelyn stood up slowly, turning back toward the station. The building no longer looked broken. It looked guarded. And for the first time since she arrived, she understood her role in all of this. She wasn't a victim who stumbled into the wrong place. She was someone who had nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing left to fear. Back inside, she walked straight to the center of the room again, this time without hesitation. The outline in the floor seemed clearer now, as if her mind had finally caught up with what her instincts had already known. She set the lantern down and knelt beside it. Her fingers traced the edges again, slower this time, more intentional. "This isn't a story about ghosts," she said under her breath. "It's a story about secrets, and secrets could be uncovered." The memory of her past flickered through her mind, the years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated like she didn't matter, the way her own family had made her feel small, replaceable, invisible. But sitting there, in the middle of a forgotten gas station in the desert, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Control. Because this time, she was the one asking the questions. She was the one deciding what came next. And whatever was beneath that floor, it didn't scare her anymore. It called to her. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the loose metal sign above the building. But this time, the sound didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a countdown. Evelyn reached for her bag and pulled out a small toolkit, old, worn, but still reliable. She placed it beside her, her movements calm, precise. Her hands were steady now, her breathing even. Because the woman who had arrived here yesterday was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone sharper, stronger, someone who no longer believed what the world told her at face value. She looked down at the floor one last time, her eyes steady, unflinching. "They called you cursed," she said quietly. "But I think you've been waiting." And with that, Evelyn Carter made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to run from the unknown. She was going to uncover it. No matter what it cost, Evelyn didn't hesitate. The moment her mind locked onto the truth that the floor wasn't just cracked, but concealing something, her entire body moved with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in decades. She grabbed the rusted crowbar she had found behind the station earlier that morning and returned to the center of the room. The lantern light flickered as she positioned the metal edge into the thin seam she had traced hours before. For a brief second, she paused. Not out of fear, but out of awareness. Whatever was beneath that floor had been hidden for a reason. Then she pushed. The sound of metal grinding against concrete echoed through the empty station, sharp and defiant. At first, nothing happened. The seal held firm, as if resisting her. Evelyn clenched her jaw and leaned her full weight into the crowbar. "Come on," she muttered. A crack. Then another. Suddenly, snap. The concrete shifted slightly, dust bursting into the air as a section of the floor lifted just enough to reveal darkness beneath. Evelyn froze. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the overwhelming certainty that she had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Slowly, she widened the opening, piece by piece, until finally, a hidden hatch perfectly aligned with the rest of the floor came fully into view. "This wasn't random," she whispered. "This was built." She pulled the hatch open. A rush of cold air escaped from below, carrying with it a scent unlike anything she had expected: metal, oil, and something aged, preserved. The beam of her lantern cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow metal ladder descending into the unknown. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment. Then, without overthinking, she climbed down. Each step echoed softly as her shoes touched the rungs, the sound swallowed by the space below. The deeper she went, the cooler the air became, wrapping around her like a secret long kept. When her feet finally touched solid ground, she lifted the lantern and her breath caught. It wasn't just a crawl space. It was a tunnel. A structured, reinforced passage stretching beyond the edges of the station. The walls were lined with aged steel panels, bolted into place with precision. This wasn't amateur work. This was deliberate. Strategic. Evelyn stepped forward slowly, her light revealing more with each movement. Wooden crates, stacked neatly along the walls. Metal cabinets, locked but labeled. And cables, old but intact, running along the ceiling, suggesting that this place had once been powered, operational. "Who built this?" she murmured. Her voice echoed faintly, disappearing into the distance. She approached the nearest crate, brushing off decades of dust. A faded stencil caught her eye. "Transit Unit 7, authorized access only." Her pulse quickened. She pried it open. Inside, carefully packed and wrapped, were small metallic devices. Not weapons, not tools she immediately recognized. But they were precise, engineered, important. She set one aside and moved to the cabinets. The first one was locked. The second wasn't. As the door creaked open, a stack of files slid forward slightly, as if they had been waiting for someone to find them. Evelyn reached in and pulled one out. The paper was yellowed but intact, and the moment she began reading, everything changed. Shipping logs, dates, coordinates, transactions that didn't make sense for a simple gas station. This wasn't just a hidden space. It was part of a network. A system designed to move something quietly across long distances without being detected. Her mind raced, connecting pieces faster than she could process them. "This place wasn't abandoned," she whispered. It was shut down. Another file caught her attention. Stamped. "Restricted internal operations only." She opened it. Inside were maps. Detailed layouts of underground routes stretching across miles of desert, linking this station to other points, some marked, others deliberately obscured. Evelyn's breath slowed. Her fear was gone now, completely replaced by something far more powerful. Understanding. Because what she was looking at wasn't just history, it was leverage. She stood in the middle of that underground passage, surrounded by evidence of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. And for the first time since she lost everything, she realized something extraordinary. This place wasn't her last resort. It was her greatest opportunity. Above her, the desert remained silent, unaware. But below, Evelyn Carter had just uncovered something that could rewrite her entire future. She closed the file slowly, her eyes sharp, calculating. "They thought this was hidden forever," she said under her breath. But they forgot one thing. She looked around the tunnel, her grip tightening on the lantern. They left it behind. And now, it belonged to her? Something inside Evelyn Carter had awakened, and this time, it wasn't survival. It was strategy. Standing in the underground tunnel, surrounded by decades-old secrets and silent evidence of a hidden network, Evelyn no longer felt like the woman who had been discarded by her own family. That version of her had stayed behind in that small rented room. Down here, in the quiet hum of something long forgotten, she became someone else. Someone who understood value, not just in money, but in information, power, timing. Evelyn carefully gathered a small selection of documents, just enough to study, not enough to disturb the system that had been left behind. Instinct told her one thing clearly. If something had been hidden this well, someone, somewhere, might still care about it. And if that was true, she couldn't afford to be careless. When she climbed back up into the gas station, the sunlight hit her face differently. The desert no longer felt empty. It felt like cover, like protection. That very afternoon, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in years. She made a plan. Not a desperate one. Not a survival-based reaction. A calculated move. She drove into the nearest town, small, quiet, the kind of place where people noticed strangers but didn't ask too many questions. There, she purchased basic supplies, but more importantly, she listened. Old men at a diner, a cashier who had worked in the area for decades, a mechanic who mentioned, almost casually, that old station out there had always been off. Evelyn didn't ask direct questions. She didn't need to. She had spent a lifetime reading between the lines, and what she heard confirmed her suspicion. People knew something was wrong with that place, but no one knew what, which meant she was the only one who did, and that changed everything. Back at the station, Evelyn began reinforcing her new reality. She repaired what she could, boarded up broken windows, replaced locks, cleared debris, but more importantly, she created boundaries. The underground tunnel was no longer just a discovery. It was an asset, one she would protect at all costs. Over the next few days, she returned below carefully, documenting everything, every crate, every file, every marking. She created her own system, organized, precise, controlled. The same discipline she had once used to manage a household, now applied to something far greater. But Evelyn knew she couldn't do this alone. Not if this was as big as it seemed. So she made her second move. She reached out quietly to someone she trusted. Not family. Never again. This was different. A former colleague, Daniel Reeves, a retired engineer with a reputation for discretion and a mind that thrived on complex systems. They hadn't spoken in years. But Evelyn remembered one thing about him. He respected intelligence, and he didn't scare easily. When he arrived 2 days later, his reaction said everything. "This isn't normal," he muttered, standing in the tunnel, scanning the reinforced walls and structured layout. Evelyn didn't smile. "I know." She watched him carefully as he examined the documents, the equipment, the mapping system. "This wasn't just smuggling," he said slowly. "This was organized, coordinated, long-term." Evelyn nodded. "And now it's abandoned." Daniel looked at her. "Or forgotten," he corrected. The difference mattered, and they both knew it. From that moment on, everything shifted. Evelyn wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. Together, they established rules. No digital traces. No outside attention. Everything documented offline. They worked in silence, methodical and focused, uncovering layer after layer of the operation that once existed beneath that gas station. And with every discovery, Evelyn grew stronger, more confident, more certain. The fear that once defined her had completely vanished. Because now, she held something no one else did. Control over a secret that had outlived everyone who created it. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the abandoned station began to transform. Not into something obvious, but into something intentional. A place that looked forgotten from the outside, but was very much alive within. Evelyn stood one evening at the edge of the property, watching the sun dip below the desert horizon. The sky burned in shades of orange and deep crimson, stretching endlessly above her. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who waited, the one who gave, the one who believed that loyalty would protect her. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who understood the world differently now. Trust was earned, value was protected, and power was never given. It was taken or discovered. She looked back at the station, her eyes steady. "They thought I had nothing," she whispered. But the truth was, she had never had more, because from the moment she stepped into that desert, Evelyn Carter stopped being the woman who lost everything and became the woman who found something no one else was meant to see. 14 months later, the desert told a very different story. What once stood as a forgotten ruin, a decaying gas station swallowed by dust and silence, had transformed into something no one could ignore. From the outside, it still looked modest. The same structure, the same weathered frame. But now, the windows were reinforced, the signage restored with a quiet, deliberate elegance, and the once dead pumps stood polished, no longer functional, but symbolic. Because this place was no longer just a gas station. It had become a destination. Evelyn Carter stood just beyond the entrance, watching as a small group of visitors stepped out of their vehicles. shielding their eyes from the desert sun as they took in the building before them. Some had traveled hours, others had heard rumors of a revived station with a story no one could fully explain. And that was exactly how Evelyn wanted it. Controlled curiosity, not exposure. Inside, the transformation was even more striking. The back office had been converted into a clean, structured workspace. The main floor was restored not to erase its past, but to honor it. Subtle displays hinted at history. Carefully selected artifacts, non-sensitive ones, were placed with intention. But the real secret remained untouched, hidden beneath reinforced flooring. Protected. The underground network still existed exactly as Evelyn and Daniel had found it, only now it was documented, secured, and understood. And most importantly, it was no longer vulnerable. Word had spread, but never too far. Articles began to appear small at first. Local features, then regional interest, stories about a woman in her late 60s who had rebuilt a forgotten place in the desert and turned it into something meaningful. They called her resilient, visionary, unbreakable, but none of them knew the truth. They didn't know about the tunnels, the documents, the power she quietly held beneath her feet. And Evelyn intended to keep it that way. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't building something for others to take. She was building something that belonged entirely to her. Financially, everything had changed. The station, now operating as a hybrid rest stop, historical curiosity, and private consulting site, generated steady income, not overwhelming, but enough, more than enough. Enough to ensure she would never depend on anyone again. Enough to make choices based on freedom, not fear. But the money was never the real victory. The real victory stood in the way she carried herself now. Straight-backed, calm, certain. Evelyn no longer second-guessed her decisions. She no longer waited for approval. She no longer shrank herself to fit into spaces that didn't value her. Because she had built her own space, and it was unshakable. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in gold and fire, Evelyn stood alone near the edge of the property. The wind moved gently now, no longer howling, just whispering, like an old companion instead of a warning. Daniel approached quietly, stopping beside her. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come here?" he asked. Evelyn didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "I do," she said finally. A pause. "Every day." Daniel glanced at her. "And," she exhaled slowly, "I would have disappeared. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. Forgotten. Reduced to a memory no one cared to revisit. But instead, she had chosen differently. She had stepped into the unknown, faced something others ran from, and uncovered something that changed everything." Evelyn turned slightly, looking back at the station. At the people inside, at the life she had rebuilt from nothing. "They thought I was finished," she said quietly. Daniel smirked. They were wrong. Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. "No," she replied. "They just didn't understand what happens." Her voice lowered, steady and powerful. "When someone who has nothing left to lose finally finds something worth protecting." The wind picked up again, brushing across the desert like a quiet applause. And in that moment, Evelyn Carter wasn't just a survivor. She was something far greater. She was proof that sometimes the place the world tells you to avoid is exactly where your life begins. Sometimes the places the world warns you to avoid are the very places where your greatest opportunities are waiting. Evelyn's story reminds us that rock bottom is not the end, it's a clean slate. When everything is taken from you, you are left with one powerful truth: you are free to choose a different path. And sometimes, the greatest risk is not taking one. Because the moment you stop running from what scares you and start walking toward it with purpose, you begin to take control of your own story. And that is where real power begins. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might be the one that changes how you see your own life.